They whispered she was ruined. They said her life was over the moment Frederick Ashworth left her standing alone in the rain, humiliated before the entire village of Oakhaven. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. Because while Frederick was celebrating his cruelty, the ground was already trembling beneath his feet, not from a storm, but from the arrival of a black carriage bearing a crest that terrified even the bravest men in England. This isn't just a story about a failed engagement. It is a true account of how silence can be the deadliest revenge. What happened on that rainy Tuesday in November 1842 changed everything. The air in the parish hall of St. Jude's smelled of damp wool and dying chrysanthemums. It was supposed to be a celebration, the engagement ball of Miss Rosalind Sterling and Mr. Frederick Ashworth. The date had been set for months. The banns were to be read the following Sunday. Rosalind stood near the punch bowl, her hands trembling slightly in her white kid gloves. She wore her mother's pearls, the only inheritance she had left after her father's passing 3 years prior. She wasn't rich, she wasn't titled, but she was kind, and she was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way that made people comfortable. Or so she thought. Frederick had been late. An hour late. When the doors finally swung open, the chatter in the room didn't just stop. It was strangled. Frederick didn't walk in looking apologetic. He walked in with a woman on his arm who was definitively not Rosalind. It was Millicent Vane, the daughter of a railway magnate from Manchester. She was dressed in crimson silk, a scandalous colour for an unmarried woman, but money has a way of silencing etiquette. Frederick walked straight to the centre of the room. He didn't come to Rosalind's side. He stood 10 feet away, creating a chasm that felt like miles. "Rosalind," he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the back of the hall, where the village gossip, Mrs. Higgins, was already scribbling notes in her mind. "I think it is best we end this charade." The silence was deafening. Rosalind felt the blood drain from her face. "Frederick, I don't understand." "It's simple mathematics, my dear," he sneered, looking down at her as if she were a smudge on his boot. "My father's estate requires an infusion of capital. You have nothing but a crumbling cottage and a sickly aunt. Miss Vane here," he patted Millicent's hand, "brings the future. You bring only burdens." Millicent giggled. It was a sharp, cruel sound. "Oh, don't be so harsh, Freddie. She looks like she might faint. Perhaps she can work in our scullery." The room erupted in varying degrees of gasps and titters. The betrayal wasn't just in the rejection, it was in the theatre of it. Frederick could have written a letter. He could have come to her door. Instead, he chose to destroy her socially, to elevate his own status with his new, wealthy connections. He wanted to show the world he was too good for the poor doctor's daughter. Rosalind didn't faint. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked at Frederick, really looked at him, for the first time. She saw the weak chin, the greedy eyes, the cruelty masking his insecurity. She realized with a sudden, freezing clarity that she wasn't losing a husband. She was escaping a prison. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unclasped the pearl necklace, her mother's pearls. Frederick's eyes widened, perhaps expecting her to throw them at him. Instead, she placed them back into her small velvet reticule. She didn't say a word. She turned her back on him. "Walk away, then," Frederick shouted, his ego bruised by her lack of hysteria. "Walk away, Rosalind. See who takes you in now. You're 23 and penniless. You're finished." Rosalind walked toward the heavy oak doors. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, not out of respect, but out of fear of catching her bad luck. She pushed the doors open and stepped out into the night. It was pouring rain. A freezing, relentless English downpour that turned the roads of Oakhaven into rivers of mud. She didn't have a carriage. She had walked here. Now she had to walk back, 3 miles to the draughty cottage she shared with her Aunt Agatha. Her silk slippers were soaked instantly. Her muslin dress clung to her skin. She was shivering so violently her teeth chattered, but she refused to stop. She was ruined. Frederick was right about that. In 1842, a woman publicly discarded was damaged goods. She reached the crossroads at the edge of the village, near the old stone bridge. Her strength finally gave out. She collapsed onto the wet milestone, burying her face in her hands. The tears finally came, hot and stinging against the freezing rain. That was when she felt the vibration. It started as a low rumble in the earth, then grew into the rhythmic thunder of hooves. Heavy hooves, not a farm cart or a doctor's gig. This was something powerful. She wiped her eyes and looked up. Through the mist and rain, 4 black Frisian horses emerged, pulling a carriage so dark it seemed woven from the night itself. It was sleek, devoid of gaudy ornamentation, but terrifyingly imposing. The carriage didn't pass her. The driver, a giant of a man wrapped in a heavy oilskin coat, pulled on the reins. The horses reared slightly and came to a halt right in front of her. Rosalind froze. Highwaymen? On a night like this? The door of the carriage opened. A set of metal steps unfolded automatically. Modern, expensive engineering. A man stepped out. He didn't carry an umbrella, ignoring the rain as if it were beneath his notice. He was tall, wearing a long black greatcoat with a high collar. He wore no hat, revealing dark hair plastered to his forehead. He walked up to the milestone where Rosalind sat shivering. He loomed over her, blocking out the wind. "Miss Sterling," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried an accent that spoke of old, cold stone castles. Who are you?" she stammered. "Someone who has been waiting for Frederick Ashworth to make a mistake," the man said, "and he has just made the last mistake of his life." He extended a gloved hand. "Come with me, Rosalind. Your aunt is already safe. Your things are packed. You have nothing left in Oakhaven. Where are you taking me?" The man's eyes flashed in the darkness, illuminated briefly by the carriage lantern. They were grey, like a winter sea. "To claiming what is yours." Rosalind hesitated. Logic dictated she should run. A strange man, a black carriage, a promise of a new life. It sounded like a cautionary tale nurses told children. But the cold was seeping into her bones, and the memory of Millicent Vane's laughter was still ringing in her ears. She had nothing. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm through the leather. He pulled her up with effortless strength and guided her into the carriage. The interior was warmer than any room Rosalind had ever entered. It was upholstered in deep, crushed velvet, the colour of dried blood. A small copper heater sat on the floor, radiating warmth. As she settled into the seat, the man tapped the roof, and the carriage lurched forward, picking up speed instantly. This was no leisurely pace. They were racing. "There is a blanket to your left," the man said, sitting opposite her. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "And a flask of brandy. Drink it. You are bordering on hypothermia." Rosalind found the wool blanket and wrapped it tight. She ignored the brandy. "You know my name. You know about Frederick. But I do not know you, sir." The man leaned back into the shadows. "My name is Sebastian Blackwood." Rosalind gasped. The air left her lungs. Sebastian Blackwood, the Duke of Kielder. He was a legend in Derbyshire, but a dark one. They called him the Duke of Shadows. He controlled the mines, the shipping lines, and half the political seats in the north. But he was rarely seen. Rumours swirled that he was disfigured, or mad, or that he had killed his father to take the title. He was the bogeyman of the aristocracy. "The Duke," she whispered. "But why? Why me? I am a nobody." "You are Rosalind Sterling," he corrected sharply, "daughter of Dr. Thomas Sterling, granddaughter of Captain James Sterling. My grandfather died before I was born. He was a soldier. He was a man of honor, Sebastian said, a commodity that is in short supply in Oakhaven. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. It looked old, the parchment yellowed and cracked. He placed it on the small table between them. Do you know why Frederick left you, Rosalind? Because I am poor, she said bitterly, and Millicent Vane is rich. Frederick is a fool who sees only gold coins, Sebastian said. He does not see the mine from which the gold comes. He tapped the document. This is a deed. It dates back 40 years. It concerns a tract of land known as Black Creek. I've never heard of it. You wouldn't have. It's a desolate stretch of rocky soil on the border of the Ashworth estate, Frederick's family land. For generations it was considered worthless. Your grandfather, Captain Sterling, won it in a game of cards from Frederick's grandfather. He never did anything with it. He left it to your father, who left it to you. Rosalind shook her head. My father left me nothing but the cottage. Your father was a careful man. He knew if the Ashworths knew you owned Black Creek, they would try to steal it. So he hid the deed in a trust managed by my solicitors in London. He stipulated that you were only to be told of it upon your marriage, or upon your absolute ruin. Rosalind stared at him. Why does it matter? If it's worthless rocky soil, it was worthless, Sebastian interrupted, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Until 3 weeks ago. My surveyors were testing the soil composition in the region. He leaned forward, his grey eyes locking onto hers. Rosalind, Black Creek sits directly on top of the largest vein of high-grade coal ever discovered in Derbyshire. The land Frederick Ashworth just threw away? It is worth more than his entire family estate, the Vane fortune, and the village of Oakhaven combined. Rosalind sat back, stunned. And he doesn't know? He suspects something is valuable nearby, which is why his father was pressuring him to marry money, to buy up surrounding land. But he doesn't know you own the key. So, Rosalind's voice hardened, you are here to buy it from me? Is that it? You saved me from the rain to strike a business deal? Sebastian didn't flinch. I am a businessman, yes. I want the coal. But I could have simply approached you tomorrow and offered you a pittance, and you would have taken it. Then why are we here? Because, Sebastian's voice dropped, becoming softer, I owed your father a life. 10 years ago, when every other doctor refused to treat a mad young lord for a fever because they feared contagion, Thomas Sterling sat by my bedside for 3 nights. He saved me. He asked for nothing. He looked out the window at the passing darkness. When I heard what Ashworth planned to do to you tonight, I have spies in his household. I decided that buying the land wasn't enough. I don't just want the coal, Rosalind. I want to help you burn Frederick Ashworth's world to the ground. The carriage slowed. They were turning through high iron gates. Where are we? Rosalind asked. Kielder Manor, Sebastian replied. Tomorrow, we announce that you are not a cast-off spinster. Tomorrow, we announce that you are my ward and the sole proprietress of the Black Creek Mining Company. We are going to make you the most powerful woman in the county. He paused, his hand on the door handle. But first you must decide. You can take the money and leave for France, live a quiet, wealthy life. Or you can stay. You can wear the silk dresses. You can attend the balls. And you can watch Frederick Ashworth realize exactly what he threw away. What is it to be, Rosalind? Rosalind looked down at her muddy dress. She thought of Frederick's sneer. She thought of the silence of the villagers who had watched her walk away. She looked up at the Duke. I don't speak French, Your Grace, she said softly. Sebastian smiled. It was a dangerous, terrifying smile. Excellent. The first thing Rosalind noticed when she woke was the silence. The cottage always groaned in the wind. The windows rattled and the floorboards creaked. But here, in the guest wing of Kielder Manor, the silence was heavy and expensive. She sat up. The bed was enormous, draped in heavy brocade. On the bedside table sat a silver tray with fresh tea and a note. Breakfast is at 9. The library. Wear the robe. S.B. She found the robe draped over a chair. It was silk, the colour of midnight, and felt like water against her skin. When she descended the grand staircase, she found her Aunt Agatha sitting by a roaring fire in the morning room, looking bewildered but happy, a plate of pastries on her lap. "Rosalind!" Agatha exclaimed, crumbs falling onto her lap. "The Duke! He sent a carriage last night. He said the cottage roof was unsafe. He has doctors here, specialists for my chest. It is a miracle." Rosalind kissed her aunt's cheek, her heart swelling. Sebastian had kept his word. He hadn't just rescued her, he had secured her vulnerability. She left Agatha and found the library. It was a cavernous room, smelling of leather and cigar smoke. Sebastian was standing by a massive map of the county spread across a mahogany table. He looked up as she entered. He wasn't wearing the greatcoat now. He was in a crisp white shirt and a dark waistcoat, looking every inch the aristocrat, yet with a dangerous edge that the other lords lacked. "You look rested," he said, not smiling. He was all business. "Good. We have 3 days before the Earl of Harrington's winter ball. That is our battlefield." 3 days? Rosalind gripped the lapels of her robe. "To do what?" "To kill Rosalind Sterling, the pity of the village," Sebastian said, walking around the table, "and to birth Rosalind Sterling, the heiress of Black Creek." He snapped his fingers. The library doors opened, and a severe-looking woman in grey entered, followed by 2 assistants carrying measuring tapes and swatches of fabric. "This is Madame Leclerc," Sebastian introduced. "She usually only dresses royalty in London. I have persuaded her to make an exception." "She is thin," Madame Leclerc noted, circling Rosalind like a shark. "But the bone structure is exquisite. We will not put her in pastels, Your Grace. Pastels are for victims. She needs jewel tones, emerald, sapphire, blood ruby." "Do whatever is required," Sebastian said, turning back to his papers. "But she is not a doll, madame. She is an owner. Make her look formidable." The next 3 days were a blur of pain and revelation. It wasn't just clothes. Sebastian hired a tutor, Mr. Finch, a retired barrister, to sit with Rosalind for 4 hours a day. He didn't teach her how to pour tea or curtsy. He taught her contract law. He taught her the price of coal per ton in Newcastle versus London. He taught her how to read a ledger and spot a fraudulent entry. "Frederick will try to swindle you," Sebastian told her over dinner on the second night. The long table separated them, but his voice was intimate. "He will assume you are stupid because you are a woman. He will assume you are emotional because you were in love. You must be neither." "I am not in love with him," Rosalind said, cutting into her pheasant. "I despise him." "Good. But hate is an emotion, Rosalind. Hate makes you reckless. You must be cold. Indifference is the weapon that will cut him deepest." On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Rosalind stood before the tall mirror in her dressing room. She barely recognized the reflection. Her mousy brown hair had been arranged in an intricate high style that exposed the elegant slope of her neck. Her skin, scrubbed and creamed, glowed. But it was the dress that changed her posture. It was a deep, iridescent emerald green velvet. It was cut fashionably low, exposing her collarbones, but with long, tight sleeves. It was modest, yet incredibly alluring. It whispered of money. Around her neck, she didn't wear her mother's simple pearls. Sebastian had sent a box up an hour ago. Inside lay a diamond choker with a single, massive emerald pendant. The Kielder emerald. She walked downstairs. Sebastian was waiting in the foyer. He was dressed in formal evening wear, a black tailcoat that emphasized the width of his shoulders. When he heard her steps, he turned. For a moment, the Duke of Shadows lost his composure. His eyes widened slightly, scanning her from the hem of her gown to the emerald at her throat. "Well?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Do I look like an heiress?" Sebastian stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood and rain clinging to him. He offered her his arm. "No," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. "You look like a queen coming to claim her throne. Let us go and start a war." The Earl of Harrington's estate, the Oaks, was the centre of social life in the county. The winter ball was the event of the season. Hundreds of carriages lined the gravel drive. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of light. Chandeliers dripping with crystal illuminated the cream of society. In the centre of the room, holding court, was Frederick Ashworth. He looked triumphant. He was laughing loudly, Millicent Vane clinging to his arm like a trophy. She was wearing pink, too much lace, too many ribbons. She looked like a confection. "So there she was," Frederick was saying to a group of young lords, recounting the night at the parish hall. "Standing in the rain, I almost felt pity. But one must be pragmatic. One cannot marry a pauper." The men laughed sycophantically. "You are well rid of her, Ashworth," one man said. "She was a plain thing. No spirit." "Exactly," Frederick agreed. "A dull little mouse." At that moment, the major domo at the top of the grand staircase struck his staff against the floor 3 times. The sound echoed through the hall, silencing the orchestra. Usually, guests were announced by name, but this time, the major domo paused. He looked at the card in his hand, then looked up, his eyes wide. "His Grace, the Duke of Kielder!" he bellowed. A hush fell over the room. The Duke never attended balls. "And," the major domo's voice wavered, "his ward, Miss Rosalind Sterling." The silence that followed was absolute. At the top of the stairs, Sebastian appeared. He looked terrifyingly handsome, a dark predator among peacocks, but no one was looking at him. They were looking at Rosalind. She stood with her hand resting lightly on his arm. The emerald dress caught the light of 1,000 candles. The Kielder emerald burned at her throat. She didn't look down. She didn't look shy. She looked out over the crowd with a cool, detached amusement. "Breathe," Sebastian whispered to her. "I am breathing," she whispered back. "Then descend." They walked down the stairs. It was a slow, regal procession. Every eye followed them. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide lane. Rosalind saw faces she knew, people who had ignored her for years, people who had laughed when Frederick dumped her. Now they looked at her with awe and hunger. They reached the floor. Sebastian led her straight to the centre, not 5 feet from where Frederick and Millicent stood frozen. Frederick's mouth was slightly open. He looked at Rosalind, blinked, and looked again. He didn't recognize her. The dull mouse had vanished. In her place was a woman who radiated power. Millicent's grip on Frederick's arm tightened until her knuckles turned white. She knew the value of the necklace Rosalind was wearing. It was worth more than her father's railway shares. "Good evening, Mr. Ashworth," Rosalind said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and carried perfectly in the silent room. Frederick stammered. "Rosalind, is that you?" "Miss Sterling," Sebastian corrected, his voice like a whip crack. "And yes, though I suppose you are surprised to see her dry. It was raining quite hard the last time you saw her." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. Frederick flushed a deep, angry red. "I don't understand," Frederick said, trying to regain his footing. You are with the Duke? The Duke has been kind enough to manage my affairs, Rosalind said, smoothing her glove. Specifically, the transition of my assets. Assets? Millicent squeaked. She has no assets. She is a pauper. Rosalind turned her gaze to Millicent. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Miss Vane, I suppose you wouldn't know. Geography was never your strong suit. But perhaps you've heard of Black Creek? Frederick went pale. Black Creek? That wasteland near my northern border? The very same, Sebastian interjected. Though wasteland is a poor description for the largest deposit of anthracite coal in the Midlands. My surveyors confirmed it yesterday. Miss Sterling is now the sole owner of the Black Creek colliery. The room erupted. Whispers flew like wildfire. Coal. Millions. The richest heiress in England. Frederick looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked at Millicent, loud, tacky, daughter of new money. Then he looked at Rosalind, elegant, titled by association, sitting on a gold mine. Greed warred with humiliation in his eyes. Greed won. He stepped forward, ignoring Millicent. Rosalind, he said, his voice dropping to a smooth purr. Surely there has been a misunderstanding. The banns, we never formally cancelled them. The audacity was breathtaking. The crowd gasped. He was trying to claim her back, right there in front of his new fiancée. Millicent let out a sound of outrage. Frederick! Rosalind didn't step back. She stepped forward, closing the distance until she was inches from him. She smelled his cologne, the scent she used to think was romantic, now just cloying and cheap. Mr. Ashworth, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You are mistaken. The engagement ended the moment you left me in the mud. I am a businesswoman now, and I do not invest in failing enterprises. She turned to Sebastian. Your Grace, the air here is rather stale. Shall we dance? We shall, Sebastian said. He swept her onto the floor as the orchestra hurriedly began a waltz. As they spun away, leaving a stunned Frederick and a furious Millicent in their wake, Rosalind felt a rush of adrenaline, unlike anything she had ever known. You were magnificent, Sebastian murmured in her ear as he spun her. His hand was warm and firm on her waist. I felt terrifying, she admitted, looking up at him. Good. Sebastian's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, the intensity there wasn't just about business. Because the real danger hasn't even started yet. Look to your left, by the pillar. Rosalind glanced over Sebastian's shoulder without turning her head. Standing in the shadows of a marble column was a man. He was older, with silver hair and a face like a hawk. He wasn't looking at the dancers. He was watching Sebastian with a look of pure, concentrated hatred. Who is that? She asked. That, Sebastian said tightly, is my uncle, Lord Silas Blackwood, the man who tried to have me committed to an asylum 10 years ago so he could steal my title. And he just realized that by helping you, I have exposed my only weakness. Rosalind missed a step. Your weakness? Sebastian pulled her closer, his expression grim. You, Rosalind. You are the weakness. The week following the ball was a strange purgatory. Rosalind was no longer the pariah of Oakhaven. She was its obsession. Invitations piled up on the silver tray in the hall, tea with the vicar's wife, dinner with the squires, a garden party at the mayor's estate. Everyone wanted a piece of the coal queen. But Sebastian refused them all. He had become increasingly paranoid. He doubled the guard at the gates of Kielder Manor. He forbade Rosalind from riding alone. The look she had seen in his uncle's eyes at the ball had spooked him, though he refused to discuss the specifics. You are a bird in a gilded cage, Sebastian told her one evening as they sat in the conservatory. The rain was lashing against the glass. a constant reminder of the night they met. "I have been in a cage my whole life, Sebastian," Rosalind replied, turning a page of her book. "At least this one has heating." She looked at him. He was pacing, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The intimacy between them had grown thick and heavy, a tension that crackled whenever they were in the same room. They weren't lovers. Propriety and Sebastian's grim honor forbade it. But they were partners, and perhaps something more. "Silas is planning something," Sebastian muttered. "He has been liquidating assets. He is desperate. A desperate man is a dangerous animal." The blow came 2 days later, and it didn't come from Silas directly. It came from the past. A letter arrived for Rosalind. It was hand-delivered by a small boy who ran off before the footman could question him. The handwriting was shaky, blotched with ink. "Rosalind, I am ruined. The engagement has cost me everything. My father has disowned me. I am leaving for America. But before I go, I must return what is yours. I have your mother's pearls. I cannot sell them. My conscience will not allow it. Meet me at the old stone bridge at noon. Please, grant me this one final act of decency. Frederick." Rosalind read the letter twice. Her mother's pearls. They were the only physical memory she had of the woman who had taught her to be kind. In the chaos of that night at the parish hall, she had dropped her reticule in the mud. She had assumed they were lost forever. "I have to go," she said, showing the letter to Sebastian. "It's a trap," Sebastian said immediately. "Frederick doesn't have a conscience." "He is weak, Sebastian. Not evil," Rosalind argued. "He is leaving the country. He just wants to clear his soul. Those pearls mean everything to me." "Then I will go. He won't show himself to the Duke of Kielder. He's terrified of you. It has to be me." They argued for an hour. Finally, a compromise was reached. Rosalind would go, but she would not be alone. Sebastian's head of security, a burly Scotsman named MacGregor, would drive the carriage. 2 outriders would follow at a distance. Sebastian himself had urgent meetings with his solicitors regarding the mine, but he promised to ride out to meet her the moment he was done. At noon, the black carriage rolled up to the old stone bridge, the very spot where Sebastian had found her weeks ago. The rain held off, but a thick pea-soup fog had rolled in from the moors, obscuring the world in grey. Rosalind stepped out. "Stay here," she instructed MacGregor. "I can see him." A figure stood on the bridge, huddled in a cloak. It was Frederick. He looked wretched. His clothes were unkempt, his face unshaven. Rosalind walked onto the bridge, her heart beating fast. "Frederick!" He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and darting nervously side to side. "Rosalind, you came. Do you have them?" she asked, keeping her distance. "The pearls?" Yes." He reached into his pocket. His hands were shaking violently. "Rosalind, you must believe me. I didn't want this. I had no choice. The debts. Millicent left me. I had nowhere to turn. Just give me the necklace, Frederick, and go." "I can't," he whispered, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. "He said he'd kill me." "Who?" Before she could process the answer, the fog behind her seemed to solidify. She heard a choke, a gurgle, and the heavy thud of a body hitting the wet earth. MacGregor. Rosalind spun around. 3 men in rough-spun clothes had emerged from the mist. They held heavy clubs. Further back, she saw the outriders lying motionless on the ground. She turned back to run, but Frederick grabbed her wrist. His grip was desperate, painful. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Rosalind. Let go of me." She slapped him, hard. The sound cracked through the quiet air. Frederick stumbled back, releasing her, but it was too late. A heavy sack was thrown over her head. The smell of burlap and mold filled her nose. Strong arms lifted her off the ground as she kicked and screamed. "Get her in the wagon!" A voice snarled, a voice she didn't recognize. "And deal with the boy!" "No," Frederick screamed. "You promised. You said no one would be hurt if I lured her here. You said you just wanted to talk to her." "Lord Silas lied," the voice said dryly. There was a sickening crack, the sound of wood hitting bone, and Frederick's screaming stopped abruptly. Rosalind was thrown onto a hard wooden floor of a wagon. She felt the vehicle lurch forward, not on the smooth springs of a ducal carriage, but with the bone-jarring rattle of a farm cart. She didn't cry. The fear was there, cold and sharp in her stomach, but underneath it was a burning, white-hot rage. They had taken her, but they had forgotten one thing. She wasn't just Rosalind Sterling anymore. She was the woman who had tamed the Duke of Shadows, and she wasn't going to wait for a hero. Sebastian Blackwood felt the wrongness before he saw it. It was a physical sensation, a tightening in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He rode his stallion, Ares, hard toward the bridge, mud flying up in clumps. He had finished his meeting early, unable to shake the feeling of dread. When the bridge came into view, he pulled the horse up so sharply it reared. The carriage was there. The horses were grazing calmly on the verge. But there was no driver. Sebastian vaulted from the saddle. He found MacGregor in the ditch. The Scotsman was alive, groaning, clutching a massive lump on the back of his head. "Your Grace," MacGregor rasped, trying to stand. The mist. They came out of nowhere. "Rosalind?" Sebastian asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Gone. A wagon. Headed east." Sebastian scanned the ground. He saw the scuff marks of a struggle. Then he saw a body lying on the stones of the bridge. He walked over. It was Frederick Ashworth. He was unconscious, bleeding from a nasty wound on his temple, but breathing. Sebastian grabbed Frederick by the lapels of his coat and hauled him up. He slapped the man's face, not gently. "Wake up," Sebastian growled. Frederick groaned, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw the Duke's face, a marzo of pure, unadulterated fury, he whimpered. "Where is she?" Sebastian demanded. He tricked me," Frederick babbled, weeping. "Silas, he told me he just wanted to negotiate the mining rights. He promised to pay off my gambling debts." "Where did they take her, Frederick? If you lie to me, I will leave you here for the crows." "The old ironworks," Frederick choked out, "at Black Creek, the abandoned smelting house." Sebastian dropped him. He didn't look back. He mounted Ares and drove his spurs into the horse's flanks. The old ironworks was a skeletal ruin of brick and rusted metal, sitting on the edge of the Black Creek property. It was a desolate place, haunted by the ghosts of industry. Rosalind was tied to a chair in what used to be the foreman's office. Her hood had been removed. She sat straight, her chin high, staring at the man pacing in front of her. Lord Silas Blackwood was a handsome man, in the way a poisonous snake is beautiful. He wore a pristine grey suit that seemed out of place in the filth of the ruin. "You are surprisingly calm," Silas noted, pausing to light a cheroot. "Most women would be hysterical." "I am saving my energy," Rosalind said coolly. "Screaming won't unlock these ropes, and you won't kill me yet." "Oh? And why is that?" "Because you need my signature. The deed to Black Creek is in my name. If you kill me, the land goes to my next of kin. My aunt? And Sebastian controls her finances. You need me to sign over the deed before I die." Silas laughed, a dry, clapping sound. "Clever girl. Sebastian chose well, or rather, he bought well." He leaned in close, the smell of tobacco smoke making her cough. "But you are wrong about one thing. I don't just want the coal. The coal is merely a means to an end. I want to destroy my nephew." "Why?" Rosalind asked. "He is your blood. He is an abomination," Silas snapped, his composure cracking. "His father was weak. He let the estate crumble while he wrote poetry. I built the family fortune. I ran the mines. And then Sebastian, that brooding, arrogant boy, inherits it all simply because he was born first? No. He paced again, agitated. 10 years ago, I almost had him. He was grief-stricken when his parents died, vulnerable. I had the doctors ready to declare him insane. I would have been regent. I would have been the duke in all but name. But that interfering country doctor, your father, saved him. He nursed him back to sanity. Silas stopped and looked at her with cold hatred. It is poetic, really. The daughter of the man who saved him will be the instrument of his destruction. You will sign the deed, Rosalind. And then I will send Sebastian your body. It will break him. He has grown fond of you. I saw it at the ball. Losing you will tip him back into the madness, and this time there will be no doctor to save him. He is not mad, Rosalind said fiercely. He is stronger than you will ever be. We shall see. Silas pulled a knife from his belt. He walked over to her, placing the cold blade against her cheek. Sign the papers, Miss Sterling, or I will start carving. Get away from her, Silas. The voice came from the doorway. It was low, breathless, and terrifying. Silas spun around. Sebastian stood in the frame of the ruined door. He was covered in mud. His chest was heaving. He held a heavy flintlock pistol in his right hand, aimed directly at Silas's heart. Sebastian, Silas smiled, though he took a step back, keeping the knife near Rosalind's throat. You are sooner than I expected. Did you ride that poor horse to death? Let her go, Sebastian said, stepping into the room. The floorboards creaked. Drop the gun, Silas countered, pressing the knife into Rosalind's skin. A drop of blood beaded on her neck. Or the heiress bleeds. Rosalind's eyes met Sebastian's. In that moment, she didn't see a monster, or a duke, or a savior. She saw a man who was terrified of losing the only good thing he had found. Do it, Sebastian, Silas taunted. Drop it. Be the hero. Sebastian slowly lowered the gun. He placed it on the floor and kicked it away. There, Sebastian said, raising his hands. Now release her. This is between us. It is, Silas agreed. But I think I'll keep her as insurance. He signaled to the shadows. 2 of his hired thugs stepped out, aiming muskets at Sebastian. You see, nephew, Silas sneered. I never intended for this to be a duel. It's an execution. Sebastian didn't look at the guns. He looked at Rosalind. Rosalind, he said softly. Do you remember what I told you about contract law? Rosalind frowned, confused. Then she remembered. Mr. Finch. The lessons. Always read the fine print, she whispered. No, Sebastian said, his eyes shifting to the rusted iron pulley system hanging directly above Silas's head, a remnant of the old machinery, held by a fraying rope tied to a cleat on the wall near Rosalind's bound hands. Force majeure. Force majeure. An act of God. Unforeseeable circumstances. Rosalind looked at the rope. It was old, rotting, but it was under tension. Silas was gloating, preparing to give the order to fire. Goodbye, Sebastian. Rosalind didn't hesitate. She couldn't use her hands to untie herself, but she could use her body. She threw her weight sideways, chair and all, slamming violently into the wall where the rope was cleated. The rusted metal cleat snapped under the impact. The rope whirred. Above Silas, a massive iron hook and chain, weighing hundreds of pounds, plummeted down. Silas looked up at the sound of the rattling chain, but he was too slow. The hook didn't hit him directly, but the heavy chain whipped around, smashing into him, and the thug next to him, knocking them both to the ground in a tangle of metal and dust. The gun went off, a wild shot hitting the ceiling. Sebastian moved. He didn't run away. He ran toward the danger. He tackled the second gunman, driving him into the brick wall with the force of a battering ram. Rosalind lay on the floor, still tied to the overturned chair, coughing in the dust cloud. "Sebastian!" she screamed. Silence fell over the room. Sebastian stood up from the unconscious gunman. He walked over to the pile of chains. Silas was groaning, pinned by the iron weight, his leg shattered. He wasn't going anywhere. Sebastian walked over to Rosalind. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he pulled a knife from his boot to cut her bonds. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice frantic as he scanned her face, wiping the drop of blood from her neck with his thumb. "Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine," she breathed, her hands finally free. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his damp coat. "I'm fine." Sebastian held her so tight it hurt, burying his face in her hair. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought I lost you." For a long moment they stayed like that, amidst the ruin and the dust, the Duke of Shadows and his Queen of Coal, finally safe. But as they pulled apart, Rosalind looked at Silas, who was glaring at them with pain-filled, hate-bright eyes. "It's not over," Silas hissed. "The scandal. I will ruin you from my cell. Everyone will know you were here alone together. You will be ruined, Rosalind." Sebastian stood up, helping Rosalind to her feet. He looked down at his uncle with cold, regal indifference. "You really don't pay attention, Uncle," Sebastian said. "To what?" Sebastian took Rosalind's hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "I have a special license in my pocket. I have carried it for 3 days, waiting for the right moment to ask." He turned to Rosalind, ignoring the villain writhing on the floor. "It is not the most romantic proposal, Rosalind, and we are covered in coal dust. But will you marry me? Not for the mine, not for protection, but because I cannot imagine a world without you in it." Rosalind looked at the man who had saved her, and the man she had saved. "Yes," she said. Sebastian turned back to Silas. "You see, Uncle? You cannot ruin the Duchess of Kielder." The scandal of the century did not unfold as Lord Silas Blackwood had predicted. There was no shame for Rosalind. Instead, the newspapers were filled with the heroic tale of the Coal Duchess and the Duke who rode into an ironworks to save her. Silas Blackwood was not so lucky. Found pinned under the machinery of his own making, he was arrested by the local magistrate. The testimony of the hired thugs, who were quick to turn on their employer to save their own necks, ensured a swift trial. He was stripped of his assets and sentenced to transportation to the colonies for attempted murder and kidnapping. The Blackwood family tree was pruned of its rotten branch. But for Frederick Ashworth, the punishment was far more subtle and far more cruel. He wasn't arrested. Sebastian deemed him too pathetic for prison. Instead, the Duke simply called in the debts. Frederick had borrowed heavily from various lenders to keep up appearances with Millicent Vane. It turned out that the majority of those promissory notes were held by a bank quietly owned by the Kielder estate. Sebastian foreclosed. Within a week of the kidnapping, Frederick lost his family home. His horses were sold. And Millicent Vane? She did exactly what Frederick had done to Rosalind. She broke the engagement publicly, claiming she had been deceived by a fortune hunter, and returned to Manchester to marry a cotton merchant. Frederick was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the bitter knowledge that he had held a diamond in his hand and traded it for a painted stone. The wedding of the Duke of Kielder and Miss Rosalind Sterling was not held in London. It was held in the small parish church of St. Jude in Oakhaven, the very same place where, months earlier, Rosalind had been publicly humiliated. But this time, the scene was different. The villagers didn't stand back in judgment. They lined the streets, throwing petals. The church was not filled with damp wool and dying flowers, but with white roses and hothouse lilies imported from France. Rosalind arrived not on foot, soaking wet, but in the open-top Kielder barouche, pulled by the 4 black Frisians. She wore a gown of white lace, embroidered with silver thread that caught the spring sunlight, Around her neck, the Kielder emerald rested against her skin, a symbol of the mine that had started it all and the love that had survived it. Sebastian waited for her at the altar. The darkness that had clung to him for a decade was gone. He looked at her with a reverence that made the ladies in the pews weep. As they exchanged vows, the silence in the church was profound. It was a silence of respect, of awe, and of victory. When they emerged from the church as husband and wife, the bells rang out across the valley, echoing off the hills of the Black Creek colliery, which was now puffing smoke in the distance, the engine of their shared fortune. 5 years later. The carriage rattled down the cobblestone streets of London. It was a cold November evening, much like the one that had changed everything. A clerk stepped out of a dingy office building, pulling his thin coat tighter against the freezing rain. He looked older than his years, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. It was Frederick Ashworth. He worked now as a junior copyist for a law firm, barely making enough to pay for his rented room. He stopped as a commotion blocked the street. People were crowding the pavement, craning their necks to see. "Make way! Make way for the Duchess!" a policeman shouted. Frederick felt a pull in his chest. He looked up. A magnificent carriage was passing. It was black, with the golden crest of Kielder on the door. Through the glass window, warm light spilled out onto the wet street. Inside, Frederick saw a woman laughing. She was more beautiful than he remembered, her face fuller, glowing with happiness. She was holding a young boy on her lap, the heir to the dukedom. Sitting opposite her, looking at her with undisguised adoration, was Sebastian Blackwood. Rosalind turned her head. For a brief second, her eyes met Frederick's through the rain-streaked glass. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She simply looked. Through him. As if he were part of the scenery, as insignificant as a cobblestone. She turned back to her husband, said something that made him smile, and the carriage rolled on, leaving Frederick standing alone in the mud. He watched until the tail lights disappeared into the fog. He reached into his pocket and fingered a single fake pearl button he had found in the gutter weeks ago. He realized then that the rain didn't wash away sins. It only washed away the people who didn't know enough to get out of it. Frederick turned and walked into the darkness, while the Duke and Duchess rode on into the light. And so, Rosalind Sterling proved that the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's living a life so beautiful that the people who hurt you become nothing more than a distant memory. She traded a man who saw her as a burden for a king who saw her as a queen. Frederick Ashworth died a pauper, not because he lacked money, but because he lacked the vision to see the treasure he held in his hands. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, justice, and undying romance, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were Rosalind? Would you have forgiven Frederick, or was his fate deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of love and retribution. Thanks for listening.